The acidic storms of Vatra Prime. The sky above Vatra Prime turned a sickly green as the acidic storm rolled in. Thick clouds swirled like angry ghosts, and lightning crackled, sending sharp streaks of yellow across the sky. The storm was coming fast, too fast. Dax adjusted his helmet and cursed under his breath. His suit's warning lights flashed red. Acidity storm APPROACHANG CEEKSHELTRMMEDATELI. Dax had lived through many storms, but this one felt different. It was stronger, wilder. The air seemed charged with something unnatural. He tightened his grip on the worn metal detector in his hand. Scavenging old tech from the ruins was dangerous, but it was how he survived. He had no choice. The wind howled like a wounded beast, and acid rain began to fall. The drops hissed as they hit the ground, melting broken metal and stone. Dax ducked under a crumbling archway and scanned the horizon. He needed shelter fast, or his suit would fail. Then he saw it. A figure lay in the open, just beyond a rusted transport pod. A person. A woman. Her body was limp, and her pale hair spread like silk across the dark ground. The acid rain was already burning through the fabric of her jacket. If he didn't act now, she wouldn't survive. Damn it, Dax muttered. His instincts screamed to leave her and save himself, but something about her felt important. He sprinted toward her, his boots sizzling with every step. The acidic rain bit into his suit. His HUD flickered. Integrity at 67%. He reached her side and dropped to one knee. Her face was streaked with ash, her breathing shallow. He didn't recognize her. No ID tag. No survival gear. She looked too clean, too untouched by the harsh world of Vatra Prime. Dax lifted her into his arms, grunting under the weight. "Hang on," he said, though she was too unconscious to hear. He turned back toward the ruins and spotted an old comms tower in the distance. If the shelter beneath was still intact, they might survive. The storm roared louder. Acid rain splattered against his visor, blurring his vision. His muscles burned as he pushed forward. His suit's system blared again. Integrity at 45%. Behind him, a low growl echoed through the storm. Dax froze. The sound was unnatural, like metal grinding against stone. He turned his head and squinted through the haze. 3 shadowy figures moved in the distance. They wore dark cloaks and strange helmets. Their steps were calm, steady, too calm for people caught in a deadly storm. One of them raised an arm, and a red laser beam scanned the ground where the woman had lain moments before. Dax's heart raced. Whoever they were, they weren't friendly. He shifted the woman in his arms and forced his legs to move faster. The figures didn't follow immediately, but he knew they wouldn't let her go that easily. The tower was closer now. Its metal frame groaned under the storm's force. Dax found the entrance hatch and kicked away the debris. The locking mechanism was rusted shut. Come on. He set the woman down and pulled a small plasma cutter from his belt. Sparks flew as he sliced through the metal. The storm winds slammed against him, nearly knocking him off balance. The figures were closer now. He could feel their eyes on him. The lock melted away, and the hatch creaked open. Dax grabbed the woman and dragged her inside, slamming the door behind them. The wind's roar dulled to a distant scream. He collapsed against the wall, panting. His suit's systems struggled to recalibrate. Acidity damages ACVR. Repair needed flashed on his HUD. The woman lay motionless beside him. He checked her pulse. Weak but steady. He pulled off his helmet and wiped the sweat from his brow. The air inside the shelter was stale but breathable. They were safe, for now. But who was she? And why were those strangers hunting her in the middle of an acidic storm? Dax's eyes fell on the small metal bracelet on her wrist. It pulsed with a faint blue light. He leaned closer. An inscription glowed. Tasol Airas Protocol. Priority 1. His stomach dropped. Solarius was a myth, a lost AI said to hold the secrets of Earth's old empire. People had died searching for it. The woman stirred, her eyes fluttering open. They were a pale, icy blue. Where am I?" she whispered. "Safe, for now," Dax said. "But we have a problem." She blinked at him, confused. "We're being hunted," he said, "and I think you're the reason why." Outside, the storm howled louder, and faint metallic footsteps echoed beyond the hatch. The hunters had found them. The mysterious tracker. The dim glow of the shelter's emergency lights cast long shadows across the cracked concrete floor. Dax's breath came in short, sharp gasps as he pressed his ear against the cold metal hatch. The footsteps outside had stopped. The only sound was the distant hiss of acid rain splattering against the structure's exterior. "They're still out there," Dax whispered, turning his helmet radio to silent mode. The woman, still pale and disoriented, pushed herself into a sitting position. Her blue eyes darted around the shelter, landing on Dax. Who are they?" she asked, voice shaky. "I don't know," Dax said. "But they want you." He pointed to her glowing bracelet. "And I think that thing on your wrist has something to do with it." The woman lifted her arm and stared at the bracelet. The soft blue light pulsed steadily, like a heartbeat. She touched it, and the light grew stronger for a moment before settling back into its regular rhythm. "My name's Rylan," she said softly. "Rylan Vex." Dax frowned. The surname sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. "I'm Dax Corin," he said. "Scavenger. No one important. But right now, we need to figure out who you are and why you're lighting up like a beacon in the middle of a war zone." Rylan rubbed her temples. I don't remember much. Just flashes. A voice saying Solarius protocol initiated. And she winced. And a name. Arctis Prime. Dax stiffened. Arctis Prime is restricted territory. Military ruins from the old wars. No one goes there and comes back. Rylan's eyes widened. "But I know it's important." Dax exhaled slowly. "Yeah. Well, first we survived tonight." The shelter trembled as something heavy landed on the roof. Dax grabbed his plasma pistol and motioned for Rylan to stay quiet. A metallic scraping sound echoed through the walls, followed by a low mechanical voice. "Target acquired. Initiating breach." Dax's heart dropped. "They're cutting through the roof." He looked around the shelter, searching for an escape. His eyes landed on a rusted maintenance hatch half buried under debris. There. He helped Rylan crawl through the narrow opening and followed after her, sealing the hatch behind them. The tunnel sloped downward, the air thick with the metallic stench of old coolant. "Where does this lead?" Rylan asked, voice trembling. "Old drainage tunnels," Dax said. "If we're lucky, they'll open near the outer ruins. If we're not." He didn't finish. They moved through the dark, guided only by Dax's wrist light. The tunnel twisted and turned, the walls slick with moisture from decades of condensation. Behind them, faint echoes of footsteps followed. "They're tracking us," Rylan whispered. "Yeah," Dax said, "and I'm betting it's that bracelet." He pointed to the device on her wrist. "Can you turn it off?" Rylan tried pressing the glowing surface. The light dimmed for a second, but flared back to life. "It won't shut down," she said, frustrated. Dax swore under his breath. "Okay, we keep moving." They reached a metal grate that opened into a larger chamber. Dax pried it open and helped Rylan through. The room beyond was vast, with large, rusted pipes crisscrossing overhead. In the center stood an old control console, covered in dust and cobwebbed wiring. Dax knelt beside it and activated his wrist tool, connecting to the ancient system. The screen flickered and displayed a faded map. "Looks like this facility was once part of Nova Ark's old transit network," he said. "We might find a transport pod if we follow the right tunnel." A sudden metallic clang echoed behind them. Dax turned, pistol raised. From the shadows stepped a figure clad in dark, acid-scorched armor. The helmet was smooth and featureless, except for a glowing red slit where the eyes should be. The figure tilted its head as if studying them. "Return the hair," the figure said in a mechanical, emotionless voice. Raylan gasped and backed away. "Heir, what are you talking about?" she asked. The figure raised a sleek, black rifle. "Surrender now, and your deaths will be painless." Dax didn't wait. He fired 3 quick shots. The plasma bolts struck the figure's chest, leaving faint scorch marks but doing little damage. The figure responded with a shot of its own. The blast struck near Dax's head, sending molten concrete spraying into the air. "Run," Dax yelled, grabbing Ryland's hand. They sprinted across the chamber toward a side tunnel. The figure followed, footsteps unnaturally quiet on the metal floor. The tunnel twisted left, then right. Dax spotted a maintenance ladder and ushered Ryland up first. He climbed after her, his muscles burning with every step. The figure reached the base of the ladder and raised its weapon. Dax fired downward, hitting a steam valve. Superheated vapor burst from the pipe, engulfing the figure in a cloud of white mist. They reached the top and emerged into an open-air ruin. The storm had passed, but the air was still thick with acidic mist. Dax spotted a dormant transport pod half buried in rubble. "Help me," he said, prying open the hatch. The pod systems were ancient but functional. He powered it up and set the destination for the outer dunes. As the pod hummed to life, Ryland stared out the window. "What did that thing mean by the hair?" she asked. Dax shook his head. "I don't know," he said, though his gut told him otherwise. The pod lurched forward, heading into the darkness. Behind them, high on the ruins, the figure emerged from the mist. It touched its helmet and spoke into a communicator. "Target in transit. Proceeding to Nova Ark's intercept." The figure turned, and from the shadows stepped 2 more armored figures. Together, they melted back into the ruins, vanishing like ghosts. The hunt had only just begun. The forgotten city beneath the sand. The transport pod rattled as it sped across the acid-scared wasteland of Vatra Prime. Its ancient engine groaned, struggling against the thick, corrosive air. Dax Corin wiped sweat from his brow and glanced at the readout on the control panel. The pod's power cells were draining faster than expected. They wouldn't reach the outer dunes, not at this rate. Across from him, Ryland Vex sat with her arms wrapped around her knees. Her pale hair was tangled, and her eyes were distant, unfocused. The faint blue glow of the bracelet on her wrist cast eerie shadows on the pod's metal walls. "You okay?" Dax asked, voice soft. She didn't answer at first. When she did, her voice was shaky. "That thing. It called me the hair. I don't understand. I'm nobody." Dax rubbed the back of his neck. "That bracelet says otherwise," he said. "Solarius Protocol. Priority 1. And those things chasing us. They're serious. We need to figure out why." Ryland stared at the bracelet. "What is Solarius?" Dax hesitated. "It was a legend when I was a kid. Supposedly, it was Earth's last great AI, built to protect human knowledge after the Exodus War. The war wiped out most of the old colonies. The survivors were scattered. Solarius was supposed to guide humanity's recovery. And it never did," Ryland said softly. "Yeah," Dax said, "because Solarius vanished. People said it was buried somewhere on Vatra Prime." He tapped the pod's side. "This wasteland used to be Earth's strongest colony. Then came the acidic storms, the collapse, the wars. Now it's just death and sand." The pod lurched suddenly. Warning lights flashed red. "Power systems failing. Override required." Dax cursed. "Hold on." He gripped the manual controls, but the pod shuddered violently and skidded across the sand. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly beneath a sky stained orange by distant storm clouds. The pod hit a ridge, flipped, and slammed into the ground with a deafening crunch. Everything went black. Dax groaned as he opened his eyes. His helmet was cracked, and his ribs ached with every breath. The pod lay half buried in the sand. Acid mist swirled around it like a living thing. "Rylan," he called. "I'm here," she said from the other side of the pod. Her voice was strained but steady. He helped her climb free. The bracelet on her wrist flickered. Then the blue light pulsed 3 times in rapid succession. "What the hell?" Dax muttered. The sand beneath them trembled. Before Dax could react, the ground collapsed. He grabbed Rylan's arm, but the sand swallowed them whole, dragging them down through a torrent of grit and stone. They fell for what felt like forever. Then, with a heavy thud, they hit solid ground. Dax coughed, spitting sand from his mouth. His wrist light flickered as he looked around. They were in a cavernous space, far below the desert's surface. The walls glowed faintly with embedded circuitry, stretching into the distance like veins of blue fire. This isn't natural," Rylan whispered. Dax knelt beside a nearby console. It was old tech, pre-war, sleek and unmarked by time. He touched the surface. The console hummed to life. The walls brightened, revealing an enormous underground city. Towers of smooth metal and glass rose around them, shrouded in mist. "Nova Arcs," Dax breathed. "The lost city." The Solaris protocol wasn't a myth. It had been hidden here all along. They moved carefully through the silent streets. The city's architecture was unlike anything Dax had seen. Too advanced for old Earth tech. The structures were intact, untouched by the acidic storms above. "Why hide a city underground?" Rylan asked. "To protect it," Dax said. "This place must have been the fallback after the war." They reached a wide plaza. In its center stood a towering obelisk covered in glowing symbols. As Rylan approached, the bracelet on her wrist pulsed again. The obelisk reacted instantly, projecting a holographic interface into the air. The image shifted to show an Earth emblem, a phoenix rising from a scorched planet. "Welcome, Primarch Heir," said a smooth synthetic voice. Rylan stepped back. Who said that?" "I am Solaris, guardian of humanity's legacy." Dax's mouth went dry. "It's real," he whispered. Rylan swallowed hard. "Why did you call me Heir?" The AI hesitated. Then the obelisk displayed a family tree. Rylan's name appeared at the bottom. Above her were names long thought extinct. The Vex line, the rulers of Earth's last unified government. "Your ancestors commanded Earth's defense during the Exodus War," Solaris explained. "You are their last surviving descendant. The Riftborn seek you because you alone can access humanity's lost defenses." "Riftborn?" Dax asked. "That's what those trackers are." "Correct," Solaris said. "They are the descendants of human collaborators who betrayed Earth to the alien invaders. Now they seek to claim Earth's ancient weapons to dominate the surviving colonies." Dax clenched his fists. "Of course, scavengers with a grudge. And we led them right here." "The Riftborn have locked onto the bracelet's signal," Solaris confirmed. "They will arrive shortly." Rylan's breathing quickened. "What do we do?" The AI displayed a map of the city. The central core houses the Solaris command node. You must reach it and activate the city's defense grid. Only the Primarch Heir can do so. Dax looked at Rylan. "That's you." She shook her head. "I can't. I don't know how." "You can," Dax said firmly. "We've come this far. We don't have a choice." They sprinted through the city, following glowing markers projected on the walls. Footsteps echoed in the distance. Dax turned and saw 3 Riftborn emerge from the shadows. Their red visors gleamed like predatory eyes. "Go," Dax shouted, firing his pistol. The plasma bolts sparked against the attacker's armor. 1 Riftborn fired back, the blast shattering a pillar beside Dax. He dove for cover, returning fire as Rylan raced ahead. "She's heading for the core," one of the Riftborn barked. Dax took aim and shot a power conduit overhead. It exploded, raining molten debris onto their pursuers. Then he sprinted after Raylan. The core chamber loomed ahead, an immense circular room with a raised platform in the center. Ryland stood there, staring at a holographic interface that hovered above the floor. The bracelet's glow matched the interface's rhythm. "Hurry," Dax urged. Raylan hesitated, then stepped forward and placed her hand into the light. The interface reacted instantly. Symbols shifted, and the city's ancient systems roared to life. "Command authentication confirmed," Solarius announced. "Activating defense protocols." The walls trembled as massive cannons emerged from hidden turrets across the city. But the Riftborn were faster than expected. The lead figure, taller with a jagged scar across its visor, appeared in the chamber doorway. It raised its weapon and fired. Dax saw the muzzle flash. He lunged. The energy blast hit him squarely in the chest. Pain exploded through his body. He collapsed, gasping for air. "Dax!" Raylan screamed. The Riftborn leader advanced. "Deactivate the core," it ordered. Raylan's eyes hardened. Her hand hovered over the interface, but instead of disabling it, she pressed the final command. "Defense grid online." Solarius confirmed. The city shook as energy cannons fired. The Riftborn's comm unit crackled with shouts of panic as their forces were obliterated. The leader raised its weapon at Raylan, but the chamber's defenses activated, and a precision plasma shot struck it down. Raylan dropped to her knees beside Dax. His breathing was shallow, his eyes unfocused. "You did it," he whispered. "You saved us." Tears blurred her vision. "Stay with me, Dax," she said. "Please." The AI spoke again. "The immediate threat is neutralized, but the Riftborn will regroup. The Solarius protocol has only just begun." Raylan clutched Dax's hand, determination in her eyes. "Then we'll be ready." The betrayal within. The hum of the Solarius core echoed through the cavernous chamber, a steady pulse of ancient power now reawakened after centuries of silence. The walls glowed with blue circuitry, casting an eerie glow across Raylan Vex's face. She knelt beside Dax Corrin, gripping his hand. His breathing was ragged, his face pale beneath his cracked visor. The chest wound still oozed through his torn suit, and his pulse was weakening. "You're going to be okay," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "His condition is critical," said the disembodied voice of Solarius. "Nanomedic systems are operational in the medbay below, but time is limited." "Where is it?" Raylan demanded. A glowing path appeared on the floor, stretching toward a corridor on the left. Without hesitation, Raylan hooked her arms under Dax's shoulders and dragged him toward the exit. He groaned, eyelids fluttering. "Stay with me," she said through gritted teeth. The corridor led to a sleek, sterile room lined with dormant medical pods. The AI activated one. Its glass lid slid open with a soft hiss. Raylan hefted Dax inside, and the pod sealed with a faint hum. "Nanite infusion initiated," Solarius announced. "Estimated recovery time, 6 hours." Raylan leaned against the pod, exhausted. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by cold fear. They were safe, for now, but the Riftborn wouldn't give up easily. "Solarius," she said, "why did you call me Primarch Heir?" "Your genetic profile matches the Vex bloodline," the AI responded. The Vex family was Earth's last governing authority before the Exodus War. Your grandfather, Admiral Cassian Vex, activated the Solarius Protocol to safeguard humanity's strategic assets. My grandfather, Raylan shook her head. I never knew him. My parents never mentioned any of this. Because it was forbidden, Solarius said. The protocol was buried to prevent it from falling into enemy hands. Only a direct descendant could reawaken it. Raylan looked down at the glowing bracelet. The idea of being some heir to a forgotten legacy didn't feel real. She had grown up as a refugee, moving from one broken colony to another. Now she was supposed to lead Earth's revival. A sharp crack echoed from the corridor behind her. Rylan spun, heart racing. Intrusion detected, Solaris said. One life sign. Unknown identity. Raylan raised Dax's plasma pistol and aimed at the doorway. Shadows danced on the far wall. Footsteps, deliberate, unhurried, grew louder. A figure stepped into view. A man with short, graying hair and a scar running from his temple to his jaw. He wore a dark tactical suit with an insignia on his chest, a coiled serpent wrapped around a broken earth. His eyes locked on Rylan. "Lower the weapon," he said, voice calm. "I'm here to help." "Who are you?" Rylan demanded. "My name is Varen Locke," the man said, commander of the Earth Preservation Initiative. Rylan didn't lower the gun. Never heard of it. Locke gave a thin smile. "Most haven't. We've been watching, though. Watching for you." His eyes flicked to the glowing bracelet. "The Primarch Heir. We've been waiting for the Solaris protocol to reawaken." Rylan's pulse quickened. "How did you get in here?" "I followed your Riftborn friends," Locke said. "They're regrouping, by the way. A strike force is inbound. We don't have much time." Rylan hesitated. The man's calm demeanor unnerved her. "Solaris," she whispered. "Scan him." Analyzing. No Riftborn biosigns detected. DNA partially matches Earth military databases. "See," Locke said, spreading his hands. "I'm on your side." "Why?" "Because Earth needs you," Locke said. "The colonies are dying. The Riftborn are gaining ground. If they capture Solaris, they'll unleash the orbital weapons buried across this planet. Weapons powerful enough to crack colony domes and wipe out entire populations." Raylan tightened her grip on the pistol. "You want me to activate those weapons?" Locke shook his head. "No, I want you to move Solaris before the Riftborn can seize it. We have a secure location in the Obsidian Range. You can control the network remotely from there." Rylan's mind raced. She didn't trust this man, but his words made sense. If Solaris stayed here, the Riftborn would eventually break through. She glanced at the medical pod. Dax was still unconscious, his vitals stabilizing but weak. "Help me move him," she said. Locke nodded. Together, they maneuvered the pod onto a hover sled attached to the medbay wall. "Warning," Solaris said. "Multiple Riftborn signatures converging on the core chamber." Locke cursed. "They're faster than I thought. We need to go. Now." The trio moved through the city's labyrinthine tunnels. The hum of Solaris's systems echoed around them, growing fainter with every step as they distanced themselves from the core. Locke led the way, checking corners with his rifle. Raylan stayed close to Dax's pod, pushing the sled while her mind churned. Who exactly was Locke? Why had he appeared now, just when they needed him most? "How do you know so much about the Riftborn?" she asked. Locke didn't look back. "We've been fighting them for years. Small strikes, sabotage missions. They're more organized than people realize. They don't just want Earth's history, they want its power." Ahead, the tunnel ended at a steel door. Locke placed his hand on a biometric scanner. The door hissed open, revealing a subterranean hangar with an old Earth gunship waiting inside. Its hull bore the faded insignia of the Terran Defense Corps, a phoenix, wings spread wide. "Get in," Locke said. Raylan hesitated on the ramp. "Solaris, can you interface with this ship?" "Negative. Vessel systems are manually locked." Her heart sank. If they left the city's network, she'd lose the AI's direct guidance. "Raylan, we have to go," Locke shouted. She pushed the sled up the ramp and into the cargo hold. Locke slammed the hatch as distant metallic footsteps echoed from the tunnels. The engines roared to life. The ship shuddered, then surged upward through a narrow shaft. Raylan watched through the viewport as the underground city disappeared beneath layers of rock. "Solaris is secure," Locke said, sitting across from her in the cargo bay. "The Riftborn won't find it easily." Raylan forced herself to nod. but her instinct screamed that something was wrong. Dax stirred in the pod. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "Raylan?" "I'm here," she said, squeezing his hand. He blinked at Locke. His expression darkened. "Raylan," he rasped. "Get away from him." Her stomach turned cold. Locke smiled faintly. "Ah," he said. "You remember me, Corin." Dax struggled to sit up. "He's Riftborn," Dax said through clenched teeth. "High Command. I saw his face on a mission years ago." Locke drew his pistol. "You're right, Dax," Locke said. "But you're too late." The gunship's cockpit sealed itself. The engines shifted course. Through the viewport, Raylan saw the destination marker, ARCTIS Prime, the heart of Earth's ancient orbital defense network. The trap was set. The Riftborn's plan. The gunship hummed with cold efficiency as it cut through the acidic skies of Vatra Prime. Raylan Vex sat frozen on the cargo bay floor, her heart hammering in her chest. Across from her, Varen Locke aimed his pistol at her, while his other hand gripped the ship's manual control tablet. The destination displayed on the holographic readout was clear. ARCTIS Prime. Restricted territory. Dax Corin lay half-conscious in the medical pod beside her, his breaths shallow but growing steadier as the nanites repaired his injuries. His words echoed in her mind. "He's Riftborn. High Command. I saw his face on a mission years ago." Locke tilted his head, observing her like a scientist studying a fragile specimen. "You're handling this well," he said. "Most people would be panicking." "Maybe I'm just planning," Raylan shot back. Locke chuckled softly. "I like that. A leader should think ahead. It's in your blood, after all. You're the last of the Vex line. Humanity's rightful heirs. Shame the legacy ends here." She clenched her fists, hiding the tremble in her fingers. "If you're going to kill us, why keep us alive?" Locke's smile tightened. "Because I need you to unlock Solaris. You're the key to the orbital defenses. Without you, we can't access the Novacrypt core at Arctis Prime. And after that," Locke's eyes glinted with amusement, "after that, humanity will remember what true power feels like. The colonies abandoned Earth to rot. The Riftborn will restore it, not as a fractured species clinging to survival, but as a force feared across the stars." Raylan's mind raced. Solaris controlled Earth's dormant orbital weapon platforms, devices capable of vaporizing entire fleets. If Locke gained control, he wouldn't stop at Earth. The colonies would fall, one after another. Dax stirred beside her. His eyes opened fully, unfocused but determined. His voice was hoarse. "Don't listen to him," he rasped. Locke's smile vanished. "Ah, Corin. Still breathing. You should have died back in the Kepler outpost raid." Dax tried to sit up, but his body betrayed him. "Yeah, well, I'm stubborn like that." The ship jolted as it passed through another turbulence layer. Outside the windows, dark clouds swirled, pierced by occasional flashes of green lightning. The acidic rain streaked across the hull, hissing with every droplet. "Enjoy the ride," Locke said, rising from his seat. "We'll be landing in 15 minutes. Then you'll unlock the core for me, or I'll start carving answers out of your friend here." He locked the cockpit behind him. The moment he was gone, Raylan dropped to her knees beside Dax. "Can you move?" she whispered. "Not much," he said, his jaw clenched in pain. "The nanites are working. But, damn, he got me good." Raylan's eyes darted around the cargo bay. The only potential weapon was the plasma pistol Locke had taken from them, and he wasn't careless enough to leave another lying around. "What do we do?" she asked. Dax forced a shaky breath. "See that maintenance panel?" He gestured toward the base of the bulkhead. "Help me get there." She wrapped his arm around her shoulders and dragged him across the floor. Dax pried open the panel with his belt knife, revealing a tangled mess of wiring. "Ship's old tech," he said. "Locke locked the cockpit with a master override. But I can reroute auxiliary control to the cargo interface. Can you disable the autopilot?" Maybe, Dax said, biting his lip as he worked. But if I fry the wrong circuit, the ship might just drop us into the acid. Raylan touched his shoulder. I trust you. Dax's fingers danced across the wires. Sparks flew. The ship shuddered. The navigation display flickered, then showed a new prompt. Auxiliary control, active. Enter command. Got it, Dax breathed. What now? Can you open the external cargo hatch? Dax hesitated. If I do that while we're moving this fast, we'll be sucked out, Raylan finished. But Locke will be too, if we time it right. Dax's eyes met hers. He saw the fear in them, the resolve beneath it. Okay, he said, but we need to get to the forward cargo grips. They moved to the metal braces lining the cargo bay's inner wall. Dax reprogrammed the control panel and gripped the nearest brace. Raylan did the same. On 3, Dax whispered. 1, 2, 3. He hit the control. The cargo bay lights flashed red. Emergency venting INITIAET. The floor split open with a screech of metal. Air roared past them as the atmosphere was sucked into the howling void. The ship tilted violently. The cockpit door burst open, and Locke stumbled into the cargo bay. His eyes widened in shock. He lunged for the control panel, but the wind tore at his footing. Raylan saw the panic in his face. The Predator was no longer in control. She unclipped the plasma cutter from Dax's belt and aimed. Locke raised his pistol. Raylan fired first. The plasma cutter's beam sliced through Locke's forearm. His weapon clattered away, vanishing into the raging winds. He screamed in pain, clutching the smoking stump. The suction dragged him toward the open cargo hatch. His fingers clawed at the floor, finding a handhold near the edge. Raylan, he screamed. Stop this. If we crash, you'll die too. She didn't answer. She just stared at him, breathing hard. You're the Heir of Earth, Locke shouted over the wind. You think the colonies care about you, about Earth. We're already forgotten. The Riftborn are humanity's only hope. You're not saving humanity, Raylan said. You're enslaving it. She shot the floor panel beneath his grip. The metal disintegrated. Locke's eyes widened in disbelief as his hold gave way. The wind yanked him backward. His body tumbled out into the sky, vanishing into the storm below. The cargo hatch slammed shut. The roar of the wind ceased, leaving only the labored sounds of Raylan's breathing and Dax's coughs. The ship lurched violently. Smoke filled the cabin. The control panel crackled. Autopilot disengaged. Navigation failure. We're going down, Dax gasped. Raylan climbed to the pilot's seat. The control stick was stiff, the screens unreadable. Outside, jagged mountains rose from the swirling mist. The gunship spiraled toward the rocky surface. She gripped the stick with both hands and pulled. The ship groaned, metal bending under the strain. The ground rushed up to meet them. Hold on, she screamed. The impact hit like a sledgehammer. The world shattered into chaos. Raylan awoke to the hiss of leaking coolant and the crackle of small fires. Her body ached, and her vision swam. The ship was a mangled wreck. The front half had crumpled against a mountainside. Dax, she croaked. A cough answered her. Dax was pinned beneath a twisted bulkhead. Blood trickled from a cut on his temple. She crawled to him. Don't move, she said. He gave a weak smile. Wasn't planning to. Outside the shattered viewport, the landscape stretched into a valley below. At the center of that valley stood a colossal black structure, Arctis Prime. Its surface shimmered like liquid obsidian, and dozens of antennae reached skyward like jagged spines. The Riftborn were already there. Shadowy figures moved along the outer perimeter. They're still ahead of us, Dax whispered. Raylan's gaze hardened. She looked down at the glowing bracelet. We finished this, she said. The last stand at Solari's core. The wreckage of the downed gunship lay in jagged pieces against the mountainside. Acrid smoke drifted upward, mingling with the acidic mist that clung to the rocky terrain. The valley below stretched like a scar across Vatra Prime's surface, and at its heart loomed the obsidian fortress of Arctis Prime. Rylan Vex knelt beside Dax Corin, her heart racing. His face was pale, and the nanites were struggling to keep up with his injuries. The bulkhead that had pinned him left his left leg twisted unnaturally. "Can you walk?" she asked, voice tight with worry. "Yeah," Dax groaned, "if walking includes crawling like a half-dead scavenger." He shifted, wincing. "I'll manage." Rylan bit her lip and looked back at the valley. Arctis Prime rose like a jagged spear toward the poisoned sky. Dark figures moved around the perimeter, rift-born soldiers in formation. The bracelet on her wrist pulsed steadily. The faint blue glow seemed out of place in the lifeless landscape. "Solarius," she whispered. The AI responded immediately. Connection restored. Query: how do we stop the Riftborn from accessing Arctis Prime's core? Arctis Prime houses Earth's last orbital defense command. Riftborn forces require Primarch biometric access to bypass the encryption. They will use you to unlock the core. Rylan's stomach turned. So if they get me in there, it's over. Correct. Upon activation, the orbital platforms will be slave to the Riftborn command network. Earth's colonies will fall within weeks. Dax cursed softly. So what's the plan? We can't just walk in there and ask them nicely to stop. Rylan ran her fingers over the bracelet's surface. The cool metal vibrated beneath her touch, as if aware of the danger. "Solarius," she said, "can we manually overload the core?" The AI hesitated. "Yes. Overload requires direct access to the central command node. The resulting energy surge will destroy Arctis Prime, but will also collapse the underground network, preventing Solarius from being relocated." "And us?" Rylan asked, already knowing the answer. "Survival probability is less than 4%. Dax laughed grimly. "Great odds. I've lived through worse." Rylan exhaled slowly. "We get in, set the overload, and hold them off until it detonates." Dax gave her a lopsided grin. "Sounds like a terrible idea." "Let's do it." They descended the rocky slope toward the valley. Dax leaned heavily on Rylan, his breath coming in sharp gasps. The ground crackled beneath their boots, the acidic sand eating away at the surface of their gear. Arctis Prime grew larger with each step. Its surface shimmered like black ice, absorbing the faint light around it. The Riftborn patrolled in squads of 3, their movements synchronized with military precision. Rylan stopped behind a jagged boulder. "We need a distraction." Dax pulled a rusted fragmentation grenade from his belt. "Found this in the gunship wreck. Old tech, but it'll go boom." She helped him brace against the rock. He lobbed the grenade toward a fuel depot near the outer fence. The grenade clinked against the metal tank and rolled to a stop. Nothing happened. Dax's eyes widened. "Damn it. It's a dud." The explosion ripped through the depot with a deafening roar. A fireball shot into the sky, and burning debris rained across the valley floor. The Riftborn scrambled toward the blast site, weapons raised. "Move," Rylan hissed. They sprinted toward the fence. The explosion had fractured part of the outer wall. Rylan slid through the gap first, then hauled Dax after her. Beyond the fence, the facility was a maze of towering pylons and antennae. The core access elevator stood at the far end of the courtyard, guarded by 4 Riftborn soldiers. "We need that lift," Dax said. Rylan raised her plasma cutter. "Cover me." She sprinted forward. The guards spotted her immediately, raising their weapons. Plasma bolts sizzled past her head. She dove behind a supply crate and fired, the plasma beam slicing through one soldier's chest. Dax, still crouched near the fence, took aim with his sidearm and fired. The shot hit a control panel on the nearest pylon. Electricity arced across the metal surface, frying 2 more soldiers. The last guard charged at Rylan. She ducked under his swing, rammed the plasma cutter into his abdomen, and activated it. The beam melted through his armor with a sickening hiss. The elevator stood unguarded. "Go," Dax shouted. Raylan slammed her hand against the control panel. The doors opened with a groan. She helped Dax inside and hit the button for the command level. The doors slid shut. The elevator began its descent. The command chamber was massive. The walls pulsed with blue circuitry, similar to the subterranean city of Nova Arx. At the room's center stood a raised platform with a crystalline console. The bracelet vibrated. "That's it," Rylan said. She helped Dax to the platform. "Command node detected," Solarius announced. "Place bracelet on interface to initiate core access." Raylan pressed her wrist to the glowing surface. The bracelet fused with the interface and symbols streamed across the console. Primarch authentication confirmed. Initiating manual override sequence. The walls trembled. Warning lights turned crimson. Core overload sequence engaged. Estimated detonation: 15 minutes. Dax exhaled shakily. Now we just have to survive for 15 minutes. The elevator doors clanged open behind them. Raylan turned. The Riftborn had arrived. A dozen soldiers filed in, forming a semicircle around the platform. Their armor gleamed under the red emergency lighting. Their weapons hummed with lethal energy. And in the center of the group stood Varen Locke. His right arm had been replaced by a crude cybernetic limb. The burned scars from the plasma cutter mirrored his face, and his eyes were wild with rage. "You really thought you could stop me?" Locke said, voice like cracked glass. "The Riftborn are inevitable. Earth needs its shepherds." Rylan stepped in front of the console. "Shepherds don't slaughter their own people." Locke raised his weapon. "Stand aside. The core belongs to us." "No," she said simply. Locke fired. Dax shoved Raylan aside and took the blast full in the chest. He crumpled to the floor, motionless. Raylan screamed. Rage boiled through her veins. She raised the plasma cutter and charged Locke. His soldiers opened fire. The energy bolt struck her suit, burning into the fabric. Pain seared through her side, but she didn't stop. She reached Locke and drove the plasma cutter into his chest. The beam hissed, melting armor and flesh. Locke gasped, eyes wide. Raylan leaned close. "Earth doesn't need monsters like you," she whispered. She wrenched the cutter free. Locke collapsed, his body smoking. The soldiers hesitated, leaderless. The core's hum grew into a deep, resonant vibration. The crystalline console blazed white. "Overload nearing critical threshold," Solarius announced. "Evacuation advised." The Riftborn soldiers turned and fled toward the elevator. Raylan dropped to her knees beside Dax. His chest was a scorched ruin. His eyes fluttered open. "Did we stop them?" he whispered. "Yeah," she choked. "We stopped them." The console's light intensified. The platform shook beneath them. The countdown reached its final seconds. Raylan wrapped her arms around Dax and held him tightly. The core detonated with a blinding flash. The explosion surged upward, obliterating Arctis Prime. The shockwave raced across the valley, vaporizing the Riftborn forces and sending a towering plume of ash into the sky. Far above the planet, dormant orbital platforms awoke. Their targeting systems realigned, then powered down permanently. The legacy of Earth's destructive past was erased. In the silence that followed, the storm clouds began to break. The acidic mist thinned, revealing a sliver of blue sky. Untouched, pure, the Heir ascends. The explosion from Arctis Prime roared like a dying god. The shockwave flattened the valley floor, sending rivers of molten rock cascading through the landscape. The fortress, once an indomitable monolith of dark ambition, collapsed in on itself, reduced to little more than scorched debris. The blast cracked the earth, splintered ancient foundations, and sent thick clouds of ash spiraling into the poisoned sky. And from the core of that devastation, two figures lay still amid the shattered remains. Rylan Vex opened her eyes to pain. Her body ached, her muscles strained as though gravity itself had grown heavier. Her suit's environmental systems were in critical failure. Acidic mist ate away at the reinforced fibers. Every breath burned. She turned her head. Dax lay beside her, unmoving. His chest rose and fell with faint, shallow breaths. His helmet visor was cracked, and the plasma whelmed across his torso still oozed despite the nanite's desperate work. "Dax," she rasped, coughing through the stinging air. She pressed her hand to his cheek, feeling the warmth of life beneath the grime. "Dax, wake up." He groaned softly. His eyelids fluttered open, revealing unfocused eyes. "Did we do it?" he whispered. "Yeah," Raylan said, voice trembling. "Arctis Prime is gone. The Riftborn lost their chance." Dax's mouth curved into a weak smile. "Good. I'd hate to think we came all this way for nothing." A deep rumble echoed across the valley. The ground trembled beneath them. The overload had destabilized the underground tunnels, triggering aftershocks that spread like ripples through the cracked terrain. "We need to move," Raylan said. She pulled Dax's arm over her shoulder and hauled him to his feet. He hissed through clenched teeth, his left leg dragging uselessly behind him. "Where exactly are we going?" he asked. "I'm not really in marathon shape." Raylan scanned the horizon. Beyond the smoke and fire, she saw the jagged silhouette of the cliffs where they'd crashed. Near the base of the slope stood a partially intact observation outpost. "There," she said, pointing. "That structure might still have comms. We need to reach Solaris." "Right," Dax said with a grimace. "No problem. Just a nice stroll through acid-soaked hell." The journey across the valley floor was agonizing. The acidic mist gnawed at their exposed equipment, melting protective plating into bubbling sludge. Dax leaned heavily on Raylan, each step a battle against pain. Rylan's body screamed for rest, but she forced herself to move forward. The observation outpost stood like a skeletal ruin. The main building leaned precariously, its supports weakened by decades of corrosive storms. Raylan kicked open the access door, and they stumbled inside. The interior was cramped and stank of burnt electronics. A dusty console sat embedded in the far wall, its interface cracked but functional. "Solaris," Raylan said, slapping the activation pad. The console crackled, then displayed a faint blue glow. "Primarch Heir detected. Connection established." Raylan sagged with relief. "Status report. Arctis Prime destroyed. Rift-borne forces scattered. Orbital platforms decommissioned. Earth's surface stabilization systems reinitializing." "Stabilizing?" Dax asked weakly. "The Solaris protocol's primary function was never war," the AI explained. "Its core mission was planetary rehabilitation. The acidic storms resulted from the atmospheric destabilization during the Exodus War. Now that the defense network is offline, Solaris can restore environmental equilibrium." Raylan stared through the cracked window. Above the ruined valley, the swirling toxic clouds were thinning. A patch of pale blue sky emerged, soft and unblemished. "You're terraforming Earth," she said, awe in her voice. "Correct," Solaris replied. "Earth will recover. Given time, the atmosphere will return to pre-war conditions. Oxygen levels will stabilize. The acidic rains will cease." Dax gave a weak laugh. "We didn't just save Earth from the Riftborn. We gave it a second chance." Raylan's eyes filled with tears. All her life, she'd known Earth as a dying world, a graveyard of forgotten glory. Now it was healing. But even as hope blossomed, a darker realization settled in her chest. The Riftborn weren't gone. They had scattered, but they would regroup. They always did. "Solaris," she said, voice hardening. "How long until the planet stabilizes?" "Preliminary atmospheric recovery. 5 years. Full surface regeneration. 20 years. "That's long enough for the Riftborn to return," Dax muttered. Raylan set her jaw. "Then we need to prepare." In the weeks that followed, Rylan and Dax established contact with the remaining human enclaves across Vatra Prime. Word spread quickly. Earth was healing. The acidic storms had weakened. For the first time in living memory, the sky revealed faint traces of sunlight through the thinning clouds. Survivors emerged from underground shelters. Engineers, farmers, and scavengers came together, drawn by the promise of rebirth. They called themselves the Dawn Builders, a name that spread with quiet, determined hope. Ryland stood on the balcony of Nova Ark's reclaimed command center. The underground city had come to life again, its ancient systems repurposed for Earth's recovery. Below, hundreds of people worked side by side, repairing infrastructure and planting the first experimental crops in open soil. Beside her, Dax leaned on a crutch, his injured leg braced with a support exoskeleton. His expression was contemplative as he watched the people below. "They believe in you, he said. Raylan sighed. "They believe in the future. I'm just here." "No," Dax said. "You're the heir. Not just to some forgotten legacy, but to humanity's hope." She looked at him, the man who had braved acidic storms to save a stranger who had stood beside her through impossible odds. She reached for his hand, and he squeezed hers gently. "Solarius," Ryland said aloud. The AI's voice responded immediately. "Primarch Heir. Status of orbital debris clearance. 82% complete. Atmospheric stabilization progressing ahead of schedule." "Good," Ryland said. She hesitated, then added, "Access historical records. Display files related to the Exodus War and the Riftborn Rebellion." The holographic interface shifted. Thousands of archived documents appeared, detailing the Riftborn's origins, human traitors who had aligned with the alien dominion during humanity's darkest hour. Ryland scanned the data. Names, battles, betrayals. The Riftborn weren't just conquerors. They were opportunists who thrived on division and despair. "Can we track them?" she asked. "Yes," Solarius said. "The Riftborn command structure still uses legacy encryption protocols derived from Earth's original defense grid. Their fleet has retreated to the Kuiper Expanse." Ryland's mouth tightened. "Then we know where they'll regroup." Dax raised an eyebrow. "You're not thinking of chasing them down, are you?" "If we don't," she said, "they'll come back stronger." He sighed, then smirked. "Of course. The brave scavenger saves the princess, and instead of a happy ending, she drags him into a galactic war." She smiled. "You're not just a scavenger, Dax." He chuckled softly. "And you're not just an heir." Months later, the first Earth Fleet scout ships lifted off from Nova Ark's restored spaceport. The skies, once choked with acidic clouds, were pale blue above the launch platforms. Ryland stood on the command deck of the flagship Dawnfire. The Earth Phoenix emblem was painted proudly on its hull. Dax stood beside her, adjusting the harness of his exoskeletal brace. "Final chance to back out," she teased. He grinned. "Nah. Someone has to keep you out of trouble." The engines roared to life beneath them. The Dawnfire ascended through the atmosphere, rising beyond the thin clouds into the darkness of space. Ahead lay the Kuiper Expanse and the Riftborn. Behind them, Earth began its slow rebirth. Humanity had fallen once, broken by war and fear, but now it rose again. And this time, they would fight not just for survival, but for the future of their world and the legacy of all who had come before. The Heir had ascended. Earth was reclaiming its place among the stars.